Welcome to the Deep Dive,
This is your shortcut to understanding the world.
where we wade through all the information overload to bring you the crucial insights. You can think of us as your expert guides.
And today, we're diving into a pretty comprehensive update. We'll be looking at the global economy, what's happening in China, and some, well, significant developments here in the U.S. based on the sources we've analyzed.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The big picture. Global economy, markets. What's really standing out is that recent gathering in Washington, D.C., right? The IMF and World Bank meetings.
Yeah, and the mood seems, well, pretty heavy, lots of pessimism.
Driven by what, mainly?
Mostly growing fears about global economic risks, particularly the whole tariff situation flaring up again.
Right, the outlook for global growth seems to be deteriorating.
Absolutely. After President Trump's Liberation Day announcement on April 2nd, with the reciprocal tariffs.
We've seen forecasts drop.
Yeah, significantly. Karen Dinan at the Peterson Institute, she's lowered her 2025 global GDP growth forecast. Used to be 3.2%, now it's down to 2.7%.
So a direct link being drawn between slower growth and these trade tensions.
Pretty much, yes. And Goldman Sachs is even more cautious.
What are they saying?
They're predicting just 1.4% year-over-year growth in the fourth quarter.
Wow, that's way down from the 3% they reported late last year.
It really is. And it's not just them. The IMF itself, they're expected to downgrade their outlook too. The managing director warned of notable markdowns.
So this creates a tough backdrop, even for countries trying to strike deals with the U.S., like Japan, for example.
Exactly. Japan's a key partner, but if its own trading partners, China, Vietnam, Mexico, get hit with tariffs, Japan's trade ecosystem weakens too. It's a ripple effect.
Kimberly Clausing at Peterson called it contractionary, didn't she? Trade wars shrinking the economy.
She did. And it messes with demand, complicates monetary policy for central banks everywhere. These things aren't happening in a vacuum.
And there are those joint indices, too, Brookings and the FT, showing falling confidence.
Sharp declines, yeah. Global economic confidence is down, financial conditions worsening, especially hitting the U.S., China, and Germany hard.
Eswar Prasad at Brookings blamed the trade breakdown and policy uncertainty, just dragging growth down.
It's interesting watching Wall Street's reaction, too.
How so?
Well, you remember the initial buzz about tax cuts and deregulation?
Yeah, seemed quite optimistic for a while.
That seems to have evaporated. Now it's caution, mostly since the tariff announcements. The S&P 500 is down over 7% already.
Ouch. And banks are slashing forecasts.
Drastically. JP Morgan's year-end target went from 6,500 down to 5,200. Citigroup's now at 5,800.
And BCA research, I heard they were particularly bearish.
Peter Berzin there is predicting 4,450. That implies like another 15% drop. He thinks a U.S. recession is likely within months.
So across the board, JPM, Citi, BCA, they've all just slammed the brakes on their expectations.
It's a major shift. Scott Cronin at the Citi basically said the Goldilocks sentiment is dead.
He even warned this could be the first bear market triggered by presidential trade policy. That's quite a statement.
It is, though, there's the counter-argument. Some say this disruption is necessary for a global trade reset, and it's just too early to judge.
But the immediate analysis seems pretty concerned.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The focus is on the negative consequences right now, and potentially long-term ones, too.
Okay, let's pivot to China then. Looks like the central government's been stepping in, injecting capital.
A lot of it.
Okay.
At least 3 trillion yen, that's about 48 billion US dollars,
Yeah.
just in the last 6 months.
To prop up local governments.
Exactly. They're heavily indebted. This is part of a much bigger debt restructuring, around 12 trillion yen, announced back in November.
And why now? What's the driver?
It's the sheer scale of the hidden debt, mostly held by these local government financing vehicles, or LGFEs.
The off-balance sheet entities.
Right, used for infrastructure projects. But the debt wasn't transparent. It ballooned after the property boom collapsed post-2020 and, all the COVID stimulus spending. It's become a systemic risk.
And these LGFVs are massive now.
Huge. By early this year, they held almost 16 trillion yen in onshore bonds. That's over 40% of China's entire non-financial corporate bond market.
Have they been defaulting?
Not widespread official defaults on the main bonds, but there's definitely been an uptick in missed payments on their less transparent debts. Shadow banking stuff.
So the government plan, the debt swap from Minister Lan Phone, did that help?
It seemed to provide some temporary relief. It was projected to save local governments about 600 billion yen in interest over 5 years.
And investors felt better.
For a bit, yeah. Yields on LGFE bonds fell, and the average coupon hit a 20-year low in Q1 this year, about 2.46%.
But analysts aren't convinced it's a long-term fix. Fitch Ratings, for example.
Right. They see it as short-term relief. It doesn't really tackle the structural problems, especially that massive hidden debt.
How big could that hidden debt actually be?
Well, internal estimates are maybe around 14.3 trillion yen, but some external ones go way higher, potentially up to 100 trillion yen.
100 trillion, that's an enormous range and a huge worry.
It is, because banks, insurers, they're heavily exposed to these LGFVs. If those bonds collapse, you could be looking at a major financial crisis.
And this is all happening while China's trying to hit a 5% GDP growth target, right?
Okay.
With weak demand, deflation, the trade war.
Exactly. They need that local government investment. So Beijing's move bought some confidence, maybe some time, but the underlying fiscal weaknesses, they're definitely still there.
And these U.S.-China tensions, they're spilling over beyond just economics, aren't they? Affecting people directly.
Very much so. We're hearing about nearly 40,000 Chinese immigrants potentially facing deportation and hundreds of students losing their visas.
The student situation sounds quite abrupt.
It does. Reports from UC Berkeley of students getting emails invalidating their status. At Stanford, library access issues for international students. One parent mentioned paying $119,000 in tuition.
And rumors of widespread visa cancellations.
Yes. And NAPSA, the Association of International Educators, reported at least 500 international students have already had visas revoked.
Mostly Chinese students.
Many are, yeah. Often in STEM fields or on government funding. We've heard specific cases. PhD students at Cornell and Dartmouth, visas apparently terminated just this month.
Now, this isn't totally new. There was that Trump executive order back in 2018.
Order 1043, yeah, targeting those with ties to the Chinese military. But this current wave seems broader.
What are the reasons being given or speculated?
Well, some reports mention criminal records or participation in pro-Palestinian protests, but also unspecified reasons. The suspicion is it's aimed at preventing CCP infiltration and tech theft.
And the U.S. government points to specific incidents.
They do, like those University of Michigan students charged for filming a military base, or the student at Illinois Tech convicted of espionage trying to get aerospace info for China.
So real security concerns driving this.
That's the argument. And alongside this, there's a tougher stance on illegal immigration from China, too.
The numbers there are high.
Around 390,000 estimated overstayers, nearly 40,000 with deportation orders. And talk of heavy fines, even asset seizures.
How's China reacting diplomatically?
Some pretty assertive responses. A foreign ministry spokesperson used a Mao quote on X, basically defiance. And within China, you see these Buy Chinese boycott campaigns popping up.
And figures in the U.S. calling for even tougher measures.
Yeah, like Laura Loomer publicly calling for Chinese student visas to be revoked.
It seems the crackdown on illegal immigrants is also tied to these national security worries.
Definitely. You have cases like Sunday Yan, arrested for allegedly acting as a CCP agent. Or Wang Shu, the scholar in New York, found to be gathering info on activists for China's Ministry of State Security.
It highlights that tension between security and open exchange.
A very delicate balance, yeah.
So back in China, what's the tangible impact of all this tension on the ground? The economy, society?
We're seeing reports from export hubs like Dongguan. It sounds pretty bad. Orders plummeting, factories shutting down, workers put on leave.
And Shenzhen.
Some businesses there are desperately trying to shift to domestic sales using live streaming, but often selling at huge discounts like 70% off.
Just trying to move inventory.
Exactly. Anecdotes from the Yangtze River Delta, Pearl River Delta, they all tell similar stories. Halted shipments, warehouses full of unsold goods, factory closures.
There was that estimate of unemployment. Potentially 30–40%.
Yeah, from someone in foreign trade. It's a shocking figure, much higher than official numbers. And you're hearing reports of citizens actually blaming Xi Jinping directly for, accelerating the decline.
Wow. And then there's this whole phenomenon of the $700 billion fake streaming empire.
Right. It's quite something. Influencers apparently faking hardships, selling counterfeit goods, outright fraud.
Like renting private jets just for videos.
Yeah, fake backstories, scripted live streams. There have been big scandals like Little Xiao's Hardworking Life or the Three Sheep Network exposing the deception.
It suggests a real erosion of trust online.
A netizen was quoted asking, "If everything can be faked, what is real anymore?" It points to something deeper, potentially.
And that lack of trust or empathy seems to show up elsewhere, too. The blocked ambulances.
Sadly, yes. Reports of victims not being rescued, ambulances obstructed. It contrasts starkly with stories of cooperation you hear from Taiwan, for instance.
There was that famous case, Ping Yu.
Right. The man sued for helping an elderly woman who fell. It had a real chilling effect. Suppressed kindness made people hesitant to help strangers. Even traffic penalties sometimes discourage yielding to those in need.
It's a bleak picture, and homeowners are struggling too. Defaults.
A huge problem. Foreclosure listings are surging. House prices are tanking in some places, like the Gaojing Garden example in Shanghai.
And people destroying their own renovations.
In despair, yes. Like Huangliang in Fuzhou, just destroying everything before the bank takes the property.
Are banks cracking down hard?
Interestingly, no. They seem to be getting more lenient, negotiating lower payments, even offering jobs sometimes.
Why?
Likely because they're drowning in unsold foreclosed properties. Nearly 1 million nationwide, apparently, and they're only managing to sell about 20%. They're stuck holding what they call worthless concrete and steel.
Heartbreaking stories. What about the car market? Price wars.
That's back with a vengeance in 2025. Fierce competition. The secondhand market is struggling. Huge amounts of unsold new inventory sitting around. Shenyang showroom example.
Brands cutting prices heavily. BYD, Tesla.
Yep, BYD, Tesla, others too. Even luxury brands like Audi offering big discounts, 25–27% off. Max's G50 example dropped to like $3,400 with subsidies.
But consumers aren't biting.
They seem hesitant. One person, Mr. Wu, described it as a terrible market environment. People are worried.
And some of the newer car companies are failing.
Yeah, the new forces. Gomer went bankrupt. Nita's having issues. Experts like Sam Ferrani and Auto Forecast Solutions think only the big state-owned and large private companies will survive.
And selling overseas is getting harder too.
Much harder. Declining domestic sales, plus increasing trade barriers abroad. The EU has tariffs up to 45%. The US 100% on Chinese EVs. Stuff.
Alongside all this, the counterfeit goods issue persists.
Oh, it's pervasive across every sector. Red Bull becomes Tier Bull. Adidas is Ebus. Yuwu's a major hub.
Book turnaround, big profits.
Exactly. But often terrible quality, even safety concerns.
Pushin is the shoe capital, right? Counterfeit Nikes.
Yeah, sometimes apparently even better quality than the originals. There was that big seizure in Long Beach in 2019, $2.2 million worth. The scale is huge, maybe a 60 billion yuan industry involving 500,000 people.
And they're adapting how they operate.
Definitely. Setting up fake overseas shopping websites, sourcing cosmetics from Shenzhen's Huaqiangbei district.
There was that food company, Dolly Foods.
The king of counterfeits. Their whole strategy is just mimicking successful products. Choco Pie, Lay's, Red Bull, Wan Lo Cat Tea.
And fake chain stores too, KFC, Starbucks knockoffs.
Yep, all over the place.
Why do people buy this stuff?
Lower incomes play a big part. And for the sellers, the profit margins are huge. Ironically, stricter regulations abroad mean more of these fakes stay and get sold inside China, harming Chinese consumers.
So all these internal problems, plus increasing pushback globally, boycotts, trade barriers.
It's a growing trend. Mexico, Vietnam, India, Russia, the US, Philippines, Indonesia, Europe. More countries are putting up barriers or consumers are boycotting.
And this hits the manufacturing sector hard.
Very hard. We're hearing about widespread factory closures again in the Pearl River Delta. Owners fleeing, workers left unpaid, people struggling to find any work.
Guangdong business owner, HR professional anecdotes paint a grim picture.
Extremely grim. Yu Shan at the University of Wisconsin-Madison warned of a potential unemployment crisis. Over 200 million jobs could be at risk just from reliance on the U.S. market.
200 million, that's staggering.
It is. He talked about the mirror image of U.S.-China manufacturing deficits and surpluses, and how U.S. tariffs, especially on re-exports, could devastate Chinese manufacturing. He predicts a massive reshaping of global trade.
And then came the official Liberation Day tariffs announcement.
Right. Tariffs on basically all imports into the U.S., specific rates for China hitting an accumulated 54%, and ASEAN countries facing 24–49%.
China retaliated.
Yes, with 34% on all U.S. imports.
Yeah.
But then Trump threatened an additional 50% tariff on China, effective April 9th, if they didn't withdraw their increase. Talks were terminated, negotiations started immediately with other countries.
What's the potential dollar impact of these tariffs?
Yang Wei calculated, based on 2024 data, it could mean $636 billion USD in extra tariffs on Chinese goods and about $180 billion on U.S. goods going to China. China just doesn't import enough from the U.S. to match dollar for dollar.
So limited retaliatory power for China.
Very limited. And Yu Shan's point is key. The U.S. goal seems to be reviving its own manufacturing, bringing production back.
Taiwan macroeconomist Wu Zhang suggested the tariffs also hit those third-party countries used to get around previous tariffs.
Exactly, targeting circumvention, effectively dismantling the old model of globalization.
And Yushan's prediction again, over 200 million job losses in Chinese manufacturing.
That's his warning. And Chu-Shen from the Asia-Pacific Chamber of Commerce thinks the world's manufacturing hub could shift, maybe to Mexico.
All while China's youth unemployment is already sky high.
Officially 16.9% in February, but Zondanden's research suggested maybe 46.5% in 2023. Professor Dingshu Ling estimated nearly 30 million unemployed graduates, plus the 200 million in so-called flexible employment, which is often just disguised unemployment.
Which tragically brings us back to those images of people scavenging for food.
A stark illustration of the potential human cost.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The S2 Underground update and U.S. news. What's the latest on kinetic activities?
The update for April 13th, 19th notes the U.S.-China trade war is still considered fairly kinetic. Even if it's not dominating headlines, it's taking on more of a military or strategic tone. Delayed global tariffs are still a factor.
What about other hotspots? Ukraine, Middle East.
Ukraine, ongoing negotiations, and an unverified report about a possible Putin-Easter ceasefire. The Middle East is kinetic in Syria, potentially with a U.S. force drawdown. Bombing in Yemen has intensified, possibly involving B-2s flying from Diego Garcia.
And the Kinetic Activities Tracker Project, monitoring U.S. incidents.
Yeah, mapping high-profile stuff beyond just normal crime.
What incidents popped up?
Northeast. An arson attack using Molotov cocktails at the Pennsylvania governor's mansion. Suspect Cody Bomber arrested, motives unclear.
Midwest?
Wisconsin. An unsealed search warrant in the Nikita Kasub case accused of murdering her parents, allegedly to fund an assassination attempt on President Trump with possible ties to neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine.
Southwest. Texas.
Escalating situation around the Carmelo Anthony trial, counter-protests, open calls for genocide. Also, a school shooting where the confessed shooter, Tracy Denard Haynes Jr., had his identity initially withheld, and another school shooting in Florida, more info expected later.
In the West?
Colorado. A large arms shipment intercepted in Canyon City, nearly 200,000 rounds of small arms ammo. 2 Mexican nationals arrested, described as having questionable immigration status. Links to cartel operations suspected.
There was a correction about Diego Garcia?
Yes. The vessel spotted was likely the USNS Second Lieutenant John P. Bobo, an auxiliary cargo ship, not a subtender, standard shipping. But a new tanker, the Senate Imperative, is there, likely supporting the B-2 bombers still stationed on the island. 6 B-2s, 6 tankers, potentially running those Yemen operations.
Any White House rumors? Infighting.
Unconfirmed rumors suggest Trump decided to go to war with Iran, but was talked out of it by Susie Wiles, Pete Hegseth, and J.D. Vance. However, mobilization indicators suggested the Pentagon might have decided on war 2 weeks prior. Could be a ruse.
And the possible U.S. drawdown in Syria, 2 theories.
Radically different ones, yeah. Theory 1, the U.S. doesn't want war with Iran, doesn't care about the Middle East anymore. Theory 2, it's strategic repositioning before potential strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Hard to know.
Anything else? GhostNet reports.
Intercepted reports were apparently good this week due to propagation, bringing in diverse news snippets. So pulling it all together, this deep dive really highlights these interconnected themes, doesn't it?
Yeah, a significant global economic slowdown really exacerbated by these trade tensions, especially U.S.-China.
And the consequences for China are far-reaching. Rising unemployment, financial instability, serious social issues bubbling up.
Plus the geopolitical hotspots and these worrying domestic incidents in the U.S.
It really paints a picture of a deeply interconnected web of global challenges. Lots of uncertainty, potential for upheaval.
Our aim today, as always, was to give you a clear, insightful understanding by weaving all this information together, something beyond the day-to-day headlines.
So a final thought for you, the listener. Consider the long-term implications. How might this reshaping of global trade, of manufacturing, impact your own life, your future?
What are the potential unseen consequences of these crises we've explored? Food for thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
If you found this valuable, please do like and subscribe for more in-depth analysis.